All right, I'll start the recording and we'll get started. Welcome back to week 4. We have something very exciting to do today. We're going to talk all about UVs. Anybody know what a UV is just off the bat? Can I get a show of hands? How many people are familiar at least? Okay. So a few, decent amount. The rest of you will learn what it is, and those of you who do understand, hopefully you pick up 1 or 2 new things. Essentially, our UVs are representing our 3D objects in 2D space. So you guys have all been modeling so far, and you've probably wondered at some point, when do we actually get to put textures on this thing and make them look good? Well, we have this middle step we need to do. It's kind of like the middle child in this process. Nobody really likes it or really wants to engage with it, but we have to do it. So to get started, if you open up Blender, you can pop into, I don't have Blender open, whoops. It sits separate as a different layout group. So if you open it up in the slides here, I've also got the slides posted already so you can download them. It's going to be same format as last week. I've got a few stop checkpoints in there where you can play around with things, and then we'll get to the weekly activity and kind of work through it a little bit together. So the slides are already up here. You can download them from Canvas. So up here in the top of my screen, I've got UV editing. And you can see when I click on it, it's going to open up 2 new windows. Okay. On the left, we have our UV space, which is represented in 2D. And on the right, we have our 3D space, which is represented in 3D. All of our modeling is going to happen on the right, and all of our UVs and texturing is going to happen on the left. Okay. So our textures can't exist in 3 dimensions technically. There are such things as 3D textures, but we're going to be ignoring those for now. In order to texture our cube, we need to take each face of this model and somehow map it to 2D. Okay, and that's what the UV maps are for. They represent our 3D objects in 2D space. The forms of the UVs are going to be exactly representative of our object. For every single face on your 3D object, you'll have some representative face on your 2D UVs. Every vertex, every face, every edge, every island. So in this case, we have this fold out of our UV, and on the left is showing me where my faces are on the texture, and you can see how that translates onto the cube. So where I've got this 1, this box is representing the front face on my cube. This one's representing the 2nd, the 4th, the top, 3rd, the other side, 6th, the bottom. The easiest way to think about this when it comes to real world terms or some kind of comparison is using this from elementary school. You probably had to do something with these in elementary school, I imagine, where you take a cutout of a cube that's been flattened and you fold it back up into a cube, right? So this is the process we're trying to follow. We're mapping our 3D object down to 2D space by unwrapping, unfolding, and flattening it. Okay. Do people actually do these? Is this something they still do? Anybody actually do this in class? Some nods? Kinda? Okay. I should have brought some as an example, but didn't have time. So on the left, we have our UV window. And there are a few things we need to get familiar with in the UV window. So if you have it open, we can pop it out, right? So this left pane is our UV window. Just like any other window in Blender, if I click on this little thing in the top here, it is changeable. But through the UV editing button up here, we just have quick access to it where it's already set up for us, right? So you could match this layout in your own settings by just dragging another window and setting it to UV editor. But this one's already here, so we might as well use it. A lot of the stuff that you've been getting familiar with in the 3D viewport is going to apply to this one as well. Things like your selection modes, okay? Your basic operations. In 3D, we've gotten used to moving with G, using R to rotate, pressing S to scale. In the context of our UVs, we're still going to be using those exact same keys. So over here, if I press A, it'll select everything. All right, so let's go into edit mode, press A, selects everything. If I drag my cursor over to this context window where my UVs are and press A, it's also going to select everything. A lot of this stuff is going to carry over. G to move, S to scale, R to rotate, right? Same for all of our panning. Shift middle mouse button to pan, just like here. Mouse wheel to zoom, just like here. And you don't really need to rotate because it's 2D. You can't really orbit in 2D. We also have different selection modes, just like we do in 3D. So oftentimes we're going to want to manipulate just one part of our UVs, not an entire part. And we use the exact same hotkeys for selecting our modes if you have a numpad. If you don't have a numpad, sorry, these won't work. You'll have to click. But if you have a numpad, then you can click 1, 2, 3, or 4 to select vertex, edge, face, or islands. Vertex, edge, and face you should all be familiar with by now because you've been using them the entire time. But island is something new. Does anybody know what a UV island is? What's the difference between an island and a face? Ethan?
It would be separate from the rest of the UVs.
It is separate. Do you know how it's separate?
It's under different UV collections.
It's close. Sorry?
Is separated by seams.
Separated by seams. So when we're selecting UVs, oftentimes we're working with big chunks. Not every face is going to have its own separate island in the UV map. Okay? So right now I just want you to give it a try though. If you could open up Blender, add a new cube, or use the one that already exists and just pop into this menu. Okay? And try using the different tools to manipulate the UVs. So in this case, we can take each individual vertex and move it around. Our snapping still works the same. I can hit X to snap on one axis, or Y to snap on the other. Z obviously is not going to work in 2D, but we can still move these all around. GX, GX, GY, GY. Okay. If I select edge, right, it'll let me select an entire edge and move it around just like you would in 3D. When I select island, it's going to select this entire piece. Right now, it's considering this entire cube as one UV island. Okay, we'll learn about seams in a second, but if I separate one of these by seams when we unwrap it, I now have two separate islands. We'll learn about seams in a second. Just want to demonstrate the difference between an island and a face, right? So each one of these is still a face. It can be selected individually, but as a whole, it's an island. And our goal is to create as more or less as few islands as possible while still flattening out our entire shape. That's kind of the goal when we're UVing. So I'll clear that. Okay. If you've been messing around with the UVs, now we can introduce starting to add seams. So if we were doing the whole folding up a paper cube example, when you're folding it up, you first have to cut it out of that piece of paper. And anywhere that that cut is made, just like where these red lines are, is going to be considered a seam. Where the two faces that, even though they're side by side in 3D, they've come apart in 2D. If we look at a corner like this one, this edge and this edge in 3D are the same edge. They're still connected on the actual model. What's happening here is if we fold this up, you can imagine this point coming up in this dimension and this point coming up in this dimension. If that's a little tricky to understand, I'll just demonstrate here quickly what I mean. If I just take this and replicate the cube's form, okay, so here's our piece of paper, folded out and flat. Here, in our corner where our seam was in the slide, it's two edges in 2D, but when we fold this up, so let's take this face and fold it up. Okay. And now I'll fold this face and fold it up. Okay. That corner cut where we had those two edges in 2D are actually still one edge. Okay, this one edge here. So we can fold any edge that is not broken up by a seam, like this one here. We're going to fold along that edge. So again, I'll do it to this one as well. We'll fold this up. Okay. Again, no seams here, right? This is all connected. We didn't take our scissors and make a cut along these two faces. So we're going to do the same thing. We'll fold along that edge. Okay. And now again, the one place that we don't have a seam is this edge right here, so we're going to fold along that edge. Okay. So if you've never done the paper example, that's essentially the exact same thing, just kind of redone in Blender, right? We had this laid out 2D flat version of this cube, and we can literally fold it like origami into this full version of the cube. Okay? So what do we want to do? We want to place seams throughout our object that let us fold it out flat. And the flatter we can get our object, the better. So I have to introduce a new menu to you now, and I'd recommend sort of following along with this as we go about it. But you can use Shift A and we'll add a new cylinder. And I'm just going to dump this down to 16. You should all be quite familiar with that by now. Get rid of these. Okay. And in edit mode, we can hit Control E to open the edge menu. So if you remember a while back when we did extrusions, we pressed Alt E to open the extrusion menu. Well, edge also starts with the letter E, so they've just moved the other menu to Control. So if you press Control E, I'd recommend again trying it now. Edit mode, select an edge, Control E. We have a ton of different options that come up. But the main one we're worried about right now is mark seam and clear seam. So if I click mark seam, the edge that I had selected is now turning red. So let me just unwrap this real quick just as an example. Here is our object's UV unwrap, as it is with just this one seam. Can anyone tell me what the problem with this unwrap is? Yep.
It's like way too like squished close together.
It's super squished and close together. If we zoom in here, we can actually see that this is kind of like the top face and it's overlapping itself and sideways. So why is that a problem? Well, this 2D texture is going to get mapped 1 pixel to 1 pixel to our 3D object. So if we're collapsing in on ourselves, we're not having enough pixels or pixels in the right orientation to actually texture the object properly. It's known as UV stretching. So this is a UV that is heavily stretched. Let's see what happens now if we go around the top of this. So if you're following along, we'll just click along the entire top edge. I can use Alt-click to select an edge loop in this case. So I'm going to Alt-click this edge loop. And see over on our UVs, it'll show us the face. Do keep in mind, this should look the same on both sides. It should look, if it's a circle over here in 3D, I should get a circle over here in 2D, right? This is not a circle. So let's go around the entire top. We'll just select this whole edge. I'm going to hit Control E again to open up that. Yep, what's up?
Okay, how do you get that menu to the left? I kind of just got here.
Oh, right. Up at the top here, you're going to go into UV editing.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. And the slides are up, so you can read through them quick if you want to catch.
Yep.
So if I Control E now, we're going to hit Mark Seam again. And now my entire top face is separated by a seam. Remember, pretend everywhere that's red, we're cutting with scissors. So if this is a real object, this face is now completely separated, right? It would realistically do something where it just popped off, like that. So let's UV wrap this again. And now when I select it, it's not being pulled away by any of those other sides. It's completely separated. So unwrapping this face by itself allows us to easily make it flat. It's not contesting with the other sides. But you see the rest of it, right? This piece is trying to be flat, but these pieces are trying to be flat at the same time. And because they're all working in different dimensions, it can't flatten itself out like that. Okay. So we are going to have to add some more seams. I'll hit Control E on the bottom one as well and mark that one a seam. Okay. And once we have our seams marked, we can click U. So the Control E menu, the main thing we're worried about there is marking the seams. And then U, in the U menu, we're only really worried about one option as well. And for now, that's unwrap angle based. There are some situations for the other ones. For example, cube projection, I use as a separate UV channel when doing shader work to create tileable roughness and stuff like that. But for now, just unwrapping angle based is all you really need to know. If you click on it, it'll unwrap your object based on the seams that you have applied, the scale you have applied, and everything else. So usually what we do, just to make things simple, is just hit U twice. You'll notice underneath unwrap angle based, right at the front there, if you look on your screen, it's probably easier to see, there's a little underline. And actually, all of our options have a little underline. This is true for literally every Blender menu in the entire program. Every option inside of a menu has an underlined letter. And if you just press that letter on your keyboard, it'll do that option. So if you've seen me just like quickly fly through menus on accident, because I'm supposed to be showing everything step by step, it means I'm just subconsciously pressing these hotkeys, right? So in this case, U is underlined, meaning to unwrap angle base, we hit U. So UU, that's an unwrap. If I hit US, it'll smart unwrap. UU, unwrap again. Okay. So this bottom face, I just want to return it to this big island, so I'm going to hit Control E again, and instead of mark seam, I'm going to clear seam. Setting up your seams and creating UVs is going to be an iterative process. You're going to go back and forth all the time. So sometimes you'll add a seam and then go, oh, that didn't work, or oh, I need more seam somewhere else. You can just go in and clear seam, and now when I re-unwrap, this face will connect itself once again to the inside of our side here. Okay. By default, when you select faces, they will show up on this side, and only the ones that you select will show up over here. So if you're having issues with particular faces, it's a really easy way to figure out where you're having a problem. You can also flip the order in which it happens. So if I go up here to the top left, there's a little UV sync selection button. Everybody see that? It's right in the top left of the UV editor window. If I press this button, you'll see, even though I don't have anything selected now, my faces are here on the UV map. So try clicking that button. Hopefully you also have a cylinder or something like this that we can use. You'll notice that I lose the ability to select islands here when I switch to sync mode. And the reason is it's now actually selecting your 3D geometry straight up from the UV map. So let's say, hey, this island is where I'm having problems. I can now select this part, and it'll show me on the 3D mesh where my problems are. So maybe I've got some bad geometry from modeling, and it shows up in the UVs. I can quickly find it here, and then I know which part is causing my problem. So I'm going to turn sync off again by just pressing the button in the top right and clicking A to show all my UVs again. Everybody with me still? Cool. Okay. There's extra details and notes in the slides. If you get confused or get lost, you can go back and read these. I put more text in these ones than I usually do. So down here, for example, I didn't just mention this, but if you have multiple objects selected, it will unwrap them together. So if I had a second object here, like this cube, and I have both of them selected, so I'm just drag selecting everything, tabbing into edit mode, clicking A, and then UU. You can see my cube is here. It's very small, it should be bigger, but it's all in one map. This is thinking further ahead, but can anybody guess why we might want to unwrap multiple objects onto one single UV map? Yep.
So they can use the same texture?
So they can use the same texture, yeah, and the same material to that extent. This is going to be a huge element of you putting your models into game engines down the line. Something that kind of happens sometimes in this course is people will Google resources or start to look at things online or YouTube about how to texture things in Blender. And the issue with doing it that way is Blender is first and foremost not a real-time program. It's not built to render in real time. It's built to render out these long, nice cinematics. And in cinematics and games, we texture things completely differently. So here, we're trying to optimize our texture usage as much as possible, right? You ever seen Call of Duty's like absolutely astronomical file sizes? We're talking like 230 gigabytes a game. Probably like 80% of that storage space is actually coming down to the ridiculous 4 and 8K textures they have loaded up in there and the uncompressed sound files they have in there. Right, so we want to minimize the number of textures we're using and the sizes of them to really optimize our game on memory. We only have so much VRAM to go around. In film, because they're rendering not in real time, they can afford to have as many materials and draw calls and things as they want, for the most part. So what often happens is students will start looking up resources for Blender texturing and materialing, and what they'll tell you is you should create a custom tileable texture and material for each different part of your object. So let's say I should bring more examples that are real. Eraser for the whiteboard. If you were to Google, right, how to texture this in Blender, something that'll probably come up is to use the shader graph to make a nice tiling wood material and apply that to this top part. And then make a nice felt or whatever this is made of material, right? And you'll have two materials on this one object, each with UVs separate on different maps. Not how it works for games. But they need to do that in the movies to get that super high level of detail. We are just trying to kind of fake those details as much as possible in games. So this would be all done on one UV map and one material. And honestly, an object this small realistically would probably be a part of a larger atlas. So I would unwrap this eraser and that marker and this wood trim for the board. They'd all be on the same texture to save some space, right? So we can maximize our UV usage. So we are going to be doing a lot of selecting multiple objects and unwrapping them together. For now, back to one object. We'll just continue with our cylinder. So here I've got it in the slides, just in case you forget what I did in person here. And our UVs don't look quite right. So I kind of demonstrated this already, but we want our UVs to match our 3D faces as much as possible. So this one's looking great, but that is a problem. I'm not going to be able to texture that. How do we debug our UVs? This is going to be really important. So if you're still following along, what I'd recommend you do is we're going to pop on over to the UV tab. And just like in 3D, how we have different overlays that we can turn on, like the wireframe and the face orientation, in 2D we also have debugging. So we're going to tab into edit mode. And up in the top here, if you can't see it by default because your laptop screen is small, you can just scroll using the trackpad. Or if you're not using a trackpad, middle click your mouse and you can scroll back and forth on the top bar.
Use the scroll wheel.
You can use the scroll wheel. You can also use the scroll wheel on it, apparently.
Yeah, I'm using the scroll wheel. I heard you say scroll and I'm like, okay, use the scroll wheel.
Fair. I've always done it with the middle mouse button. But either way works, as long as you can get to the side over here where you'll find the two little overlaying circles. Same overlay symbol as 3D. And if we drop it down, you'll see there's an option here for UV stretch. UV stretch. And if I just click that box, my UVs go from little translucent gray things to bright, colorful things. This option is going to tell us where our UVs are stretching. So, like I said earlier, if I clear all this, for example, and just re-unwrap it, it's actually not going to let me unwrap it because it knows it's broken. So let's do that. Right. You can see with the overlay, we can now get a better idea of how bad our UV is stretching. So anywhere that's a dark blue is good. The color pattern for this is a little bit funky, but it goes dark blue to greenish to yellowish to orangish to reddish. If you're getting into like the red zone, your UVs are schmucked. You're gonna have to fix that. Even this light blue zone, not very good, right? We're looking for dark blue. Yep.
How did you turn that mode on?
Up here in the overlays, you have to be in edit mode with your UVs selected. There is a UV stretch option. Okay.
That was already on for me then.
Cool. If you're in my example file that you're doing the work in later, then I have it turned on by default. So that's why. But you see, there's also another option. So not only do we have to worry about UV stretch, where it's not flat enough, we also have to worry about the scale of our UV islands. So in 3D, this face and this face are the exact same size, right? I'm not playing any tricks, they're the same size. When we unwrap it, look at the difference in size between the top face and the bottom face. So if we textured these the same way, one of these is getting this much texture space, and one of them is getting this much texture space. It's totally uneven. So we can use our second overlay, and you're going to have to use both as you go through to tell us what's wrong. So here we have one face that's blue, fantastic, and one face that's bright orange. This is using the exact same scale, where as we move towards red, it's getting worse and worse. The bright orange one we know is wrong. So let's turn on that sync mode again. Top left, I'm pressing the sync mode, right? Because this lets me select from my UVs to my object. So I know this face is wrong, right? So what I can do is find where this is on my 3D mesh, and I know that I need to separate this because it's busted into a different island so it can be the same size as this one. So let's now select the bottom face. I'm going to hit Control E. I'm going to hit Mark Seam, just like we have been doing. And then I'll hit A to make sure everything's selected together. If you select one individual part, it will only unwrap that individual part, and it will try to fill the entire UV. So if I just select the bottom and unwrap, the scale is still wrong because it's maximizing the amount of space that the UV can take up. Right? It's always going to try and fill up this 0 to 1 space. So we want to make sure we have everything selected so it unwraps evenly. Great. So now we have one last issue, right? It's still light blue. It's not quite perfect. And that's because this object, or this last part, is also in need of some love. Right? So if we go back to our angle stretching, you can see we're getting some pretty serious stretching. These faces are just straight up and down, straight rectangles, but on the UV map, they're being represented as these stretched out little cones, right? They should look much more like these rectangles. Okay. So I read or put it all in the slides, okay? But that's the example we just did. So what we're left with is we've cut this face off and we've cut that face off. And we're left with this tube. Imagine trying to fold this tube down flat without overlapping itself. It's not possible. It's not made of rubber, so we can't stretch it out from the inside, right? We have to flatten it by unrolling it. So we need to add one more seam somewhere along here. Anywhere will do, but one more cut so we can unroll our cylinder somewhere flat. So I'll just add one in the front here. We'll bring back those top and bottom. Okay, and you should have a structure that looks something like this now if you're following along still. So you've got the top and the bottom cut out. And when we hit U, we get a perfectly flat side rolly piece. Yep.
Would we be able to unwrap like when we unwrap when we separated the top and the bottom, could we have like one of its edges still connected to like the cylinder part?
Technically, yes.
Would that keep it as like one island, and is that better?
Technically, we keep it as one island. Whether or not it's better, I would probably say no, it's not, for some reasons we'll learn. So if I was to get rid of one of each of these, you'll see it's still perfectly straight, and it does connect, and it looks a little phallic, so I'm going to do that. The issues with that, one, you can see it went sideways to try and compensate. So what happens when we have our UVs at an angle, this is something I usually teach more in modeling too, is you get aliasing. Our pixels are square. So as soon as your UVs are diagonal, you're cutting between pixels. And the pixels can only be one color, right? So you get heavy aliasing along those edges. The other thing is, and this is another thing that's more of a modeling 2 thing, but you're asking ahead, every hard edge we have is technically going to be a seam. Because the textures, when they hit these seams, they can't continue, right? The island is not connected. So if I have a repeating tiling texture that's going like all along here, even though these two faces are connecting here and here, maybe, the texture is not in the same place. So it's not going to tile perfectly. So you get what's called a breakup where the seam is. I'm going to talk about it a bit more later. So we want a minimum number of seams, yes, but we also want to make sure all of our hard edges are seamed so that we can hide those breakups.
And what counts as an island again?
An island is any piece that is separated completely by seams. So
we have 3 islands here?
Yep, this is 3 islands, exactly. So you can see, even though we have this seam here, this is one island because it wraps around and connects back into itself here. If I was to add another one on the other side, then it would stop there. And we'd end up with 4 islands. If that makes sense. So you'll have a lot more than 3 or 4 islands typically, because I imagine you're making shapes much more complex than a cylinder. But there is good news. There is very good news. Most of this UV stuff we're doing is fundamentals based. Once you understand it at a core level for these basic objects, you should understand it for just about anything else we do. By the end of this class, I promise you'll be able to unwrap basically anything except characters. We have to do that a specific way, but we'll learn about that later. Yes?
How does like unwrapping UVs and stuff like that like apply to game development? Or like how can you use it in a game?
You have to use it in the game. There's no way around it.
Okay.
Our textures are in 2D. So all of the work we're doing to create detailed textures, maps for our objects, they have to be these 2D planes. How do you apply that 2D plane to your 3D object?
Okay. So it's like, so you would use like a 2D image to texture your object, and that 2D image is what you apply to the UV in a way, to add it to the 3D object.
Yeah, I think you missed this part at the very beginning, but basically each face is going to be mapped somewhere onto the texture, and they work interchangeably. So if this face is here on the texture where this one, if I moved this face over here, it would also say 2. Right? But because it's there, it says 1.
Okay.
And that's the basic idea behind it all. Right. So the good news is, no matter how much we increase the complexity of our objects, all of the things we just talked about remain perfectly true. So I just made this wacky shape and just colored in the lines in different places so you can get an idea of what parts, right? It's a little bit hard to tell what islands are separate because it packs them pretty tightly. But this piece here, you can see, it matches the close shape of this part that's cyan here, right? This part here, though it's curving, when we flatten it, just like with the side of the cylinder, it becomes a continuous strip. Jason?
if we can still rotate the things in our UV like panel, why do we have to worry about the aliasing?
There are some things that just straight up don't fit. Eventually these things will be so tightly crammed and packed that some things will just have to go diagonally. Or in a case like this, where I've got edges that are around a corner like this. So how can I can't line up all of them. I've got to kind of just pick.
But earlier in the simple one that you were showing, we would have been able to rotate it back to...
You could have, yeah. But the principle, like I said, it applies more in a grander scale than on just the cylinder. On just the cylinder, you could have rotated it back to be perfectly even, but there's no point.
Does the sizing of the things in this window matter? Because like earlier the cube was tiny. Does that going to cause issues?
The cube was tiny just because of the scaling. I'm going to talk about that in a bit too. So here though, everything should be relative in size on both sides. So this face is big, right? It's probably the biggest face here. It's, right? Also the biggest thing on the UV. This green part, which is just an extension of that hole, I could take this UV and put it literally right there and it would be the exact same size, right? These are all supposed to match up one-to-one between 2D and 3D. The principles that we've gone over just now, all the same stuff is going to apply. There's even better news. Knowing where to seam. So the complicated part usually comes down to knowing where to seam. If we go back and forth and we work with the debugging and adding seams and unwrapping and just making it iterative, it's usually not that hard to get some good result anyway. But when we were modeling at the beginning, I was like, oh, you should pretend your object's made entirely of cylinders, or pretend your object's made entirely of cubes, or however else you want to block it out. When we're UVing things, we can use similar principles. Basically, just imagine everything is a cylinder. Okay? So when we unwrap cylinders, I just did that live example with you. We have a top cap, a middle that unwraps flat, and a bottom cap. And you're always going to end up with roughly this sort of setup. Even though we add complexity, most objects are still going to fall into some category of square, cube, or cylinder. For example, the handle of a chisel. Though I'm not picking the exact top and the exact end, we can still kind of imagine this as just one big cylinder, where in order for it to unwrap flat, we need some kind of top cap, some kind of middle part that unwraps flat, and some kind of end cap. It's the exact same principle. So if I unwrap it or make the seams in the exact same way, right? Picking any one of these would work, but I'm starting here. Same with the end. And then we know we need one down the middle to unwrap that middle section flat. We end up with a very similar looking setup where we've got top cap, end cap, middle. Right? It's more complicated, it's still just a cylinder. It still gets unwrapped like a cylinder. Yes, we do have some stretching and things like that, but I'm going to show you how to fix that later. Okay. Is everybody good with that? So then what I'd like you to do is join me on Canvas. And I've just uploaded this simple hammer. So you just find simplehammer.blend. And we can download it real quick. And we'll revisit these principles with slightly more complex object. And then I'll give you a chance to kind of follow along. Wrong blender. Okay. I'll give you a minute to download it and get it open, and then once we're all good, we'll get started. This isn't a super complex prop, but it does kind of demonstrate all the different things that we need to know when we're unwrapping. Is everybody that's going to follow along have it good to go? Downloaded, open, ready to go? Okay. So let's talk about how we're going to approach this object when it comes to UV unwrapping. So first and foremost, we know from looking at it that this object is split up into a bunch of these smaller objects. I've got a handle, I've got this like mounting plate, and then I've got this top piece of the hammer here. We want to make sure that everything is unwrapped to the same UV map so we can give this one single material and one single texture. So I'm going to make sure I box select the entire object. Now when I tab into edit mode, I can access all of the meshes at once. Perfect. Okay. So if you select everything and tab in, we can access everything at once. Currently our UVs are not looking too hot.
How did you select everything in edit mode?
Just drag selected in object mode, and then in edit mode, just press there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, my screen keys are disabled again. There we go. All right. There you go. So from here, let's start working on these pieces one by one, and then we'll clean up different little areas. So the easiest one, probably in this case, because we just kind of talked about it, is going to be this handle, because it's more or less a cylinder, right? How do we want to break this up? Anywhere that we have a hard edge, by default, is going to become a seam, for reasons that we'll look into more when I start the texturing bit. But that means that we know we have to put seams somewhere around here, somewhere around here, and potentially somewhere up there too. So even though this is quite simple and looks like one cylinder, we do have to unwrap it as two separate cylinders, right? One here, and one that's the entire length. If you're wondering how I got just the handle out, I just clicked on the handle and hit backslash. This will isolate any object you have selected. So if you're working on a compound object like this can be super useful because you hit slash and it's the only thing in your viewport. Hit slash again, everything else comes back. Something you might have been doing is clicking and then hiding and then clicking H and then hiding, and then you hit Alt H and everything comes back. That works too. Slash is easier. So I'll hit slash here. I'll hit tab to go into edit mode. And we'll start by separating this cylinder for the handle. So I'm going to make sure I'm in edge mode. Okay. We can't make seams on vertices or faces. They are only on edges. If you select a face and hit Control E, it will just make a seam around that entire face. This can be useful, but it's not often very useful. So edge mode is the way to go. Yep.
I can't select just the handle.
Can't select just the handle? It should be, yeah, they're all separate. So yeah, you just pick just the handle and then hit backslash. So let's start by separating this. We want to make unique islands. And remember, anywhere that we have seams going all the way around something, it's going to become its own island. So let's start with this little knob down here. If I Alt-click to select this edge loop, so I've just selected around the bottom of the knob, we'll hit Control E and mark seam. You can also hit Control EM. So Control EM does the same thing, right? Because if you look here, M is underlined. So now, this seam is totally cutting off this knob. And we can confirm this using another hotkey. This one's not in the slides, but I'll share it with you. It's not too complicated. It's just the letter L. Okay. And L stands for linked. And it's going to select anything that's linked together But if I click this little thing in the bottom after I press L, so L, this little pop-up comes up, you'll see one of my options for the limiter is seams. So if I press that now, it's going to select islands just as if it was in my UV editor, because that link selection is going to stop when it gets to seams. If I removed one of these seams, right, so like Jason was saying earlier, now if this was all one, if I press L, it's not going to stop. I'm getting the entire object again. So we can mark this again, press L, and now we know for sure we're good here. This part is separate.
I
Okay.
think U and A also do the same thing, like marking the seams.
U and A.
Yeah.
U, A. Yep, same thing. Both work. What I would recommend doing on like a higher level, if you're really going to do it, is I usually bind seam to like the number 8 or 9 on the numpad, because they don't really do anything that useful. So 8 for mark seam and 9 for clear seam. And then I can just hit 8 and it's done. Okay, so we have this bottom part sectioned off. Let's move up to the top part, and we're going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to use Alt and click, and now this part's sectioned off. UA or numpad 8 or Control E mark seam, and we can use L to double check. So now we have this cylinder that we were working on totally isolated from our other cylinder. Perfect. So now we have essentially 2 cylinders to unwrap. Okay. So I wouldn't recommend doing this part while you're unwrapping. You should kind of just grasp it at this point. But let's say I hide everything that's disconnected from the part we're working on right now. Whoops, it's hiding too much. Right. Now it's just like any other cylinder. We need a top cap. So we'll use Alt-click to separate the top part. Right? There's a hole here where it continues onto the other cylinder, but we're not worried about that. We're treating this as an individual cylinder. So let's mark this. Same thing, Control E, M, that's marked. Okay, now here's our top cap. Bottom, Alt-click, Control E, M. Everybody still with me? Mostly?
Not really.
That's more just for visualization purposes. It's still connected. It's just, I just hit it. If you press H, so I used L to select the different parts, and then used H, and it hides it, and Alt-H unhides it. But that's more just for visualization. If you were actually unwrapping this, you would kind of just assume that it's one part, and then go from there. Right? What's the last step I need to do for this middle cylinder? It's the same as any other cylinder, so we're missing one seam that we know we need. Down the middle, somewhere. Okay, so let's unwrap this whole thing, and boom. We've got a pretty good start. This portion is looking good. Top cap, end cap, middle, right? Just like a cylinder. This part is not looking so good because we haven't actually gone and unwrapped this part yet. But we're going to do the same thing.
Hey Marcus.
Yep.
When you take a step back, how do you do like half of this stuff? Because I'm trying to just follow you, and I'm like, okay, I'm lost.
Yep. So what we did is we're treating this as a separate cylinder. So we're treating this object as 2 cylinders to unwrap,
Yeah.
and we're using seams to separate them.
Yeah.
So if I take away all of my seams,
Yep. Yeah.
the first thing I want to do is separate this cylinder
Yeah.
as if it was its own cylinder and not connected to the rest of it.
Yeah.
So to do that, the parts where they connect the 2 cylinders, I need to mark a seam.
Okay. Okay.
So I'm going to mark a seam here, Control E, and then mark seam. And I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom where it connects to the other cylinder.
Yeah.
Control E, mark seam. So now if I unwrap it, right, it looks very wrong.
It does.
But by separating it with those seams, if I press L here for the link selection,
Yeah.
we know that this piece is its own island.
Yeah.
So we can work on it some more.
Okay.
So with it being its own island, we can unwrap it like a cylinder. And we know from earlier that cylinders need one top cap, one bottom cap, and the middle. So I'll add a seam around the top like this to create that end cap. Control E, M. And now if I unwrap, we can find this face here has separated itself from everything else. And we'll do the same thing at the bottom. So Alt-click, Control E, M. And now if I unwrap again, that face has separated itself. So now I've got the top cap, the bottom cap, and we just need the middle. To unwrap the middle, just like in the earlier demo, we need some seam running down the length of it. So I'll just pick this random edge here, Control E, M. And now this part will unwrap flat as well. So now if I unwrap, I'm selecting everything with A, pressing U, and then pressing U again. We can ignore this part. So if I take this island here and ignore it, I'll just press H to hide it, because that is all of this stuff that we haven't added seams to yet.
And Marcus, do you recommend when working with objects to like make a big seam around it, or just like in some parts, like this is like working the UV lens?
Depending on what you're making, sometimes you're going to have a lot of small islands, or if it's something like a character, you'll try and minimize your seams as much as possible.
Yeah.
For something like this, that's a hard surface object. It's quite easy to imagine it as multiple different objects broken up. So in this case, I'm just imagining this as two cylinders. That's it.
Yeah.
And that becomes much easier. So this long seam here, we need it. We can't unwrap this without this seam to make it flat. So that's why we have this long one. It will show up in our texture, which isn't that great, but it's necessary. Every cylinder is going to need some seam running along the length. Just is what it is. So now I'm going to do the exact same thing to this other part. We have this top cap, but I'm going to do something a little bit differently here. Let's go back to our entire object. I'm going to hit backslash again and tab out of edit mode, so I'm in object mode again. Notice tell me what's going on here. It's clipping through, which is totally fine, but we have faces up in here, right? These ones. These faces are never going to be seen on the actual object, so all they're really doing is wasting our UV space and wasting our rendering time. There's no reason for these faces to exist. So we can just delete them, right? Which makes our unwrapping job even easier, because now there's no top face. There's no top cap that we need. So the only thing we need to worry about now for this cylinder, quote unquote, is running that edge down the side. So we'll do the same thing. I'm going to click and just select the edges down the side. Control E, mark seam. Just as if it was another cylinder. And now when we unwrap, we can see it's separated itself here and flattened itself out pretty good. So let's turn on the UV stretch. Right? It's pretty good. And then we have one more kind of here at the bottom. But again, talking about where things are visible or not, this bottom piece is not super visible. So when we're examining what parts need fixing, because it's not super visible, we don't need to be as worried about it. We're going to be worried a lot more about the main focal points, parts like this, right? The bottom is barely even visible. So a little bit more stretching than normal is okay. If we wanted to fix this bottom part here, we could add a couple cuts to have it kind of flap out like a star. So I just selected a few edges around the sides. If you've ever worked with cloth before, something like this, these would be relief cuts basically, where instead of trying to fold this object really tightly over itself, if we add these extra cuts, it'll kind of just star out, but the stretching will be gone. Okay. Right, so this is pretty flat. We could of course make it flatter by breaking it down into more and more tiny cylinders. So if I take this part and treat just this bit as a separate cylinder again, then it'll get even flatter. So if I make a seam here, right, now it's even flatter, and we've just got this one piece. Okay. But I think it's good enough that we can leave it as two big cylinders like this.
It's always covering the whole thing. How do I get it to have all of it?
Covering the whole thing?
I don't know. Hold on, hold on.
Is anybody else?
How do I get it to
I can't really see in the light. It's because you're unwrapping it with just that part selected.
How do I select everything?
You.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Yep.
I tried doing this on one of my models that I made for fun, and there was some stretching that I still don't really understand how to get rid of.
Yeah, I'd recommend just kind of putting along with the example we have, and then there'll be time to kind of apply this to your own models later. But it'll be harder to try and learn the concepts and apply them to something new at the same time. I would try to focus in on this little bit by bit, and because you are going to have to do this for your own models eventually. Yep.
So if it's for something like this, where it's like, if it's just like, if this object was just on a table and it's kind of small, and we do have those bits of stretching, do we even care about getting them to not stretch at all?
Probably not.
Because the texture is also like so close to each other.
Yeah, if this was an object in like a character's hand and everything, I'd be more concerned about it. But if something like a prop sitting on a table, then no, it doesn't matter nearly as much.
So then we'd be fine with this amount of stretching.
Yep. If I was to be putting this in a game myself, I would probably move on with this. Yes.
Because if we added more seams, it would also add to like the rendering time.
If you add more seams, it won't add to rendering time. It adds more visible cuts in your mesh. So we haven't textured anything yet, so you haven't seen it. Don't follow along with this so much. Just kind of observe this bit. So you can see everywhere we've added a seam, this texture, which is just a checker texture, it's cutting. So it's not tiling consistently, right? You can see the seam along the edge here, right? We want to minimize the number of visible seams as much as possible, right? We have these other areas that aren't perfectly connecting. It's impossible to make it line up in every single angle. So you are going to have seams. And if you start looking at your favorite video games, you'll be able to find the seams a lot easier than you think. But it's, these are necessary. So it's not the end of the world. What you want to do is hide them as best as you can, though. So if this was something that was going in the player's hand, take the side that has the long seam, put it on the other side. Player's now holding it this way. Well, they'll never actually see that side of the hammer where the seam is. Yep.
So how did you get the checker map?
As I was saying, don't worry about that right now. That's just for, I'll show you how to do that later because we're going to go over it in a bit. That was just to demonstrate the
I
point.
just wanted to check the line.
Is it sometimes better to have a bit of stretching over a flat UV map?
No. There's never a reason to have stretching unless you're going for some very specific strange effect.
But if we don't want to see those seams and it's for something like that top bit of the handle.
something like, well, you can't get rid of these, though.
Well, like we could get it flatter.
Oh, here you mean?
If we separated like at the top of this handle where it like kind of plays out a little bit.
This bit here?
Yeah, if we separated those.
Oh yeah, you could do this. You could separate it and make it even flatter, and then just worry about this part. That's more of a preference thing at this point.
But I'm saying if we were to, because that would make our UV flatter.
It would.
But does that make more visible seams because we separated those?
Yes. So there will now be a visible seam here too.
Okay.
So if I just turn that thing back on real quick, you can see it. There's now a visible seam here. Whereas before, if I get rid of this,
yeah, in that case.
there's no visible seam there.
In that case, if like the stretching is so minimal, is it better to keep it that way rather than put a visible seam?
Yeah, if it's minimal enough, something like this, at the angles you're viewing this, it won't really look that much different, depending on. So whether you do it like this or like this, it really doesn't matter too much. Whatever looks best in the end. Like I said, you're gonna have to iterate on this, or you have to try different things. You can apply these checker textures once I show you the add-ons later, and you can look at it and go, okay, this looks better, or let's add a seam and unwrap it, and say, okay, maybe this looks better. You kind of have to just trial and error it. In this case, I kind of know this looks good enough, so we can move on with it. And we'll get rid of that. Okay. Okay, so with our handle done, and hopefully everybody's handle done, can I get a hand if you're totally lost, no idea what's going on? Okay, nobody totally lost. That is good. So let's move on to our next piece then. So we've done our handle here. We're going to follow the exact same process, but we're just going to move on to our next piece, which is this middle part, this cube. So I'm going to use backslash again to isolate this cube. And there are a few principles that we just used that we're going to do the exact same thing here. So one of them, you'll see again, this top face, right? It's not visible. So there's no reason for it to take up UV space. So we can delete it. If I press backslash again, now we have something like this. So let's UV unwrap it just on its own. And we can see we get a lot of stretching. The good news is, just like we unwrap every cylinder, every cube we unwrap is also more or less going to be unwrapped the same way. So let's add a seam on each of these corners. So I've just selected the 4 corners of my rectangle. I press Ctrl E, and then I press M. And let's try unwrapping again. So A to select everything, U, U. Okay. Cubes, rectangles are pretty simple in this way, right? I've just added seams around these edges here. Another element to this is that there is no one right, quote unquote, way to UV unwrap, right? So I have it set up like this at the moment. It's fine and dandy. I could also do this, where I mark the bottom off, don't mark the sides off, and just mark one as if it's a cylinder. Okay. Still also technically correct. It just has seams in different places, right? But it still unwraps the same way. There's no one way to correctly unwrap everything. If I unwrap it like this as well, with each individual face. It just means that between every single face we're going to have a seam, so that's not very good. So in this case, for me, what I think is best for this is using it in this manner, where we add one seam to each corner to unwrap it. If, let's say, we had a top face for this cube, we would have to unwrap things a little bit differently. We'd probably have to separate one of the faces entirely and then we're left with a top and then the unfolded bottom. But again, just like our cube, we could unwrap this, and I'll just do this quickly because I showed you kind of in the example. We could unwrap this just like our cube also, where it's now just this flat T shape, right? There's no one right answer, but those 3 ways I just showed you to unwrap this cube, you can apply to any cube, and one of them will work better than another. You just kind of pop around and try them and see what works. So in this case, like I said, there's no top face, so we'll use this. You didn't have to follow along with those bits if you were shocked by, that was just sort of to demonstrate that there's no one right way to do this. There is one there is one wrong way to do this, and that's just to select every single face and make them all seams and then unwrap them, because then every single edge on your object will have a texture variation. That is not good. If I just select this, marked everything as seam, and unwrapped, it's flat, sure, but I've got so many little cuts and so many different texture seams that when I apply my texture, it's just cut up literally everywhere. There's not one square that is the right size here. It's kind of hard to see with the checker texture, but if I put like a tiling wood texture on this, it would look awful.
Wait, but in the cube example, aren't those count as hard edges?
They do, they do.
And if you separated each, like every seam,
If I was baking a normal map down to this, I would have to. But we're not, and haven't learned about normal maps because that's also like a next year thing. So I'm not going to worry about it too much. Here we're just kind of optimizing our islands. Yeah, the hard edges thing is specifically for baking down normal maps, which is something none of you are probably familiar with, and we might cover later, but probably don't have time to because that's not something you really need right now. Okay, everybody good with this middle piece? Kind of understood? So we can take what we just learned about that middle piece and apply it to this piece now, because they're kind of the same. So I'm going to use click and then control click to select along an entire edge. If you click and then control click, Blender will find its way to whatever edge you click, taking the shortest path possible. So if I click one side and then the other with control, I get the whole edge, which makes it very easy to hit Control E, M. Okay. Again, to iterate, there's an infinite number of ways we could unwrap this. If I unwrap this with this seam running along, let's pretend this is a cylinder. So now I'll add a top cap, just like we did with all the other cylinders. Right? So the top is now separate. And a bottom cap, just like we did with all the other cylinders. And we still have the middle. If we unwrap this, we're kind of going to get a cylinder-like result with a top cap, an end cap, and a middle. Okay? But maybe this doesn't work the best. We're getting some angle stretching. We can try something different. So let's add another seam along this edge here. Just going to do the same thing as we did on the bottom, but on the top. Mark a seam. Hit A to select everything. And hit U twice to unwrap it. And now we can see, oh, this part looks great. So this section that we just unwrapped with the seams on each side but no seams in the middle, it's unwrapping perfectly flat. And our area stretch is good as well. So let's do this as our primary option for all of these different parts. So I'm going to do the exact same thing on this side. Along the top, select the edges with Control, Control E, mark. And then the exact same thing on the bottom. Click, Control click, Control E, mark. And now we've created 4 identical islands. So when I hit A and UU, okay, we have 4 nice islands for the sides, the tops, and then a cap for the front and a cap for the bottom. everybody able to get this part? Is everybody still with me? Is anybody not with me and would like me to do part of that again? Okay, if not, we'll move on to the last bit. So we've now got each of our individual pieces unwrapped, and we know that they're going to be flat. So the last part, and this is where you make the money, select all of the objects. Okay, we know they're all flat individually, which means when we unwrap them together, they'll all still be flat. So select all of the objects at once. We'll hit tab. Our seams show up just as they were. And we hit UU one more time. Okay, so our angle stretching is identical to how it was. Now we can move on and check our size stretching. So now that we're combining different objects, this is when we need to check our size stretching. We want to make sure that relative to this piece over here, this thing is the same scale relative to it in 3D. So let's take everything and change from angle to area in our UV debugging thing. So up here in the overlays, click the drop down and change from angle to area. Okay? And we're looking pretty good. The only area that's egregious is maybe this area here, but it's like half inside of the other object, so it's not really a big deal. Okay. So from here, I can call this object UV complete. I could theoretically from here start texturing this object and then throw this object with some textures in it into a game engine. Okay. Okay. Last chance, any questions? If you were super lost, I can go over it again really quickly before we move on to the next part.
I didn't get lost, but my angles were all good. They were all dark blue, but my scaling is a little weird.
Scaling's a little weird.
There's no red, but there's like a brighter blue.
Like this?
No.
Not like that.
Mine has a bit more than like blue.
Make sure you're unwrapping it all together. Like,
Just selecting A and unwrapping, right?
yeah, but all of the objects selected at once.
Yeah.
Selecting A, unwrapping. If you're getting different light blues, it just means you might have different seams than I do in a couple different areas. But generally, light blue like this is okay. This turquoise part is where I would start to get worried.
Yeah, I got that color in here.
This one right here.
Yeah.
What, for like the entire thing?
For a good bit of them.
For a good bit of them?
Yeah.
It's possible then that you just kind of missed one seam in the random spot. That can kind of do it.
Yeah, I unwrapped the top hammer part differently, where I need a seam on each side of it so that it can still like be one piece.
Gotcha. So you left it more like.
Like on the flat face, like on the like hitting edge. I took like
Oh.
the off, and on the other side as well.
Like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what it was.
Yeah. So this is one of those areas where, yeah, it's not beneficial to save that break. The easy way to, again, figure out what's causing the problem is to turn on sync. And then we can kind of go in here and be like, okay, what part is causing my problem? Or vice versa, just start selecting around with L and figure out what part is going to cause the problem.
But wouldn't you be looking for like the bright blue spot and then click on that? That doesn't pinpoint you towards that edge.
It doesn't. What you can also do is scale them around, because as you change the scale, the area is obviously getting mixed up, which might help you find some things. In this case, it doesn't really help you too much either. So you kind of just have to assume, okay, everything's light blue. It means I need more seams. Yeah. So a lot of it is trial and error. It's hard to really dictate exactly what's going on sometimes, right? This might even be acceptable. But generally, if you're going to do it on all 4 of the other sides, you might as well do it to this side as well.
Extra ring.
An extra ring, that's fine. It's really, if you did it up in here and added a seam, then you'd have an extra ring. It's really up to how you want to do it. There's, like I said, there's no one right way to UV. We're just trying to make it look as good as possible, so when we start our texturing, we have a good base. Yep.
What I did was a good idea with that for like future models. So on the stack here on the top, I did choose circles, so I separated into an actual range. So I don't have anything like curving in a way. So I just want to know if that is something that's a good idea or a bad idea. I don't know.
Yep. I mean, you could do it like this. It's all the same. It's, again, what it really boils down to is how many visible seams you're okay with. Because if you do this, you're going to end up with a lot more visible seams. Right? So this way, right, I've got the long seam, but then I've also got a seam here and a seam here. Might be what you want, might not be what you want.
That's fair.
Okay, if you have this simple hammer and you followed along and it's UV unwrapped properly, great, because keep it. Don't close the file just yet, because you can now use this to pass over to our texturing bit in a little while. We're going to introduce substance, right?
Marcus, sorry.
Yeah.
I have a question. Last class, which was our last tutorial, we learned about vertex.
Yeah.
But we were having a trouble, me and some colleagues as well. How do we export the vertex colors to Unity? Because every time we do, like, just bring the object to Unity, it just kind of dies and it's just one.
What file format are you using? That's something we can talk about that after class.
No worries. FBX.
Yeah, okay, I'll chuck that into the end of class.
Sorry.
No worries. So now that we've kind of got the basics of understanding how our UVs are made and everything done, we can talk about how we can optimize them a little bit better for our projects. So this is the one that just came up the most, seams. Technically, if I add seams to everything, it's the flattest it can possibly be. True, this is true. But as I also just kind of demonstrated, everywhere that you add a seam, you're gonna start to get these visible cuts. Okay, so this is a default Blender checker material. It is used to see where your UV seams are and make sure that your UVs are all relative in scale. I'm gonna show you how to use it in just a minute. We can see everywhere that we have a seam, our squares are no longer squares. So right here, the square is a triangle, boo. The square is like a pentagon, boo. Adding seams is good for making things flat, but there does need to be a balance that's struck. The only way to find that balance is to try a few different things. And eventually you'll get a knack for when and where you can get away with not having seams, right? A little bit easier to see with a real texture. This is where the problem kind of lies. So right there is a UV seam along this pipe, and you can see how the tiling texture starts to suddenly break up, right? Kind of ugly. Not really what we want in our game. Some of them you can't get away with. We've already talked about cylinders a bunch. You have to have a seam down the length of the cylinder. You can't avoid that one. So what do? This one is put on the bottom. No, what's up?
With good texture painter software, though, can you not paint it, like use a 3D model to paint it so that it's seamless, as long as you actually put in that character to make your...
Yes, but no.
Yes, but...
Because a lot of that stuff is based on tiling textures. And the issue is it's impossible for it to tile across seams. The way that it happens in Painter, that we'll explore in a bit, is called projection. You can projection map things in 3D space. But for anything like this, we're using a tileable texture and not a unique texture. It's impossible to do without the seams. Why do we have to use the tiling textures? That's something we'll talk about probably next week. Okay. Actually, I guess we can kind of talk about it right now. So when we have our UVs and our objects, the scale is relative to everything else. If I have an object that's 2 meters, an object that's 4 meters, an object that's 8 meters, the 0 to 1 UV space is still identical. Okay? So imagine that each one of these squares is just unwrapped flat to the UV space, 0 to 1. That's great. That means the size of our details is going to be determined by the texture, because we're mapping these UVs straight to a pixel. So let's say we have a 1080 or a 1024 pixel map. This 2 meter object has 1024 pixels across it. This 4 meter object also has 1024 pixels across it. And this 8 meter one also has 1024 pixels across it. Does anyone know what this is going to do to our textures? Anybody want to take a guess? Yeah.
Maybe I won't say stretch it out, but I think it might affect the resolution given the fact you're scaling it up or down depending on the size of the square.
Bingo. As you make the object bigger but don't increase the amount of pixels available, what we call texel density, which is amount of pixels per real world unit, something like 512 pixels per centimeter, is going to decrease. So these checker textures, it's just one checker texture, okay? But spread out across the different objects, it's going to represent different sizes. So let's imagine each one of these cubes, or squares here, sorry, is a pebble in your texture, like a rock. You've made a ground texture for your ground, and you've got a rock that's the size of this. Well, now depending on your different objects, a rock in this object is a different size than a rock on this object, even though they're all the same world, that you're building the same world with them. Now all of your parts and details are different sizes. Okay? So we're trying to keep that consistent. So here, I just made up this random thing, and I've got on one side, this left side, an object with improper UV scale, where the parts of the objects that are big don't necessarily show up as big in the texture map. So here, this giant baseboard down here, it's only got like 7 pixels to work with because the UV has been shrunk. Whereas this side seam and this sidebar have been increased in scale. And now the detail is very visible. What we want is for that detail to be even across the entire model. So every piece of wood grain here is the same size as every piece of wood grain up there, and etc. Okay. So what can cause this? Well, Blender, when you unwrap, what it's actually using is the object's scale. Sorry, it's using the object when it's unscaled. So if your object has some kind of scale, it's going to cause issues. So this boils back to that same problem-solving lecture from before where we talk about making sure you hit Control-A to apply your scale. So what do I mean by wrong size? Well, if we use this example that we just had, right now everything as far as area is concerned is looking pretty good, right? And if we check our objects, they all have a scale of 1 applied, the way they should. Let's now shrink this down. And I'm going to apply the scale and scale it up. Just an example if you forgot to maybe apply the scale to something. So now this object, the head of the hammer has a scale of 4. Let's see what happens when I unwrap everything together. Already you can see it's freaking out when my area has changed. If I unwrap it, you can see the biggest island that we have is this middle box. And the hammer parts that are supposed to be big are tiny. So when I did that example earlier where I added the cube, this is what's happened because I had to scale the cube down to match the size of the cylinder, and that's why it was so small. We obviously don't want this to happen. Okay. So just like when we have problems with our modifiers and everything else, when we're done and ready to sort of start UVing, we want to make sure that we apply our scale. So we can just select everything, hit Control plus A, and a menu will pop up. We can apply our location, our rotation, our scale, all transforms at once, or just rotation and scale. When we're doing our UVs and things like this, the only one we really need to worry about is scale. Rotation and location don't really affect UVs, but those might be things you want to apply for modifiers and things like that. Yep.
Sorry, what was the hotkey to apply?
Control and A.
I don't think that's default.
That is definitely the default. So make sure you're in object mode. Yeah. Yeah, and then from there you can apply different things. So in this case, we're just going to apply scale. And now when I go back and re-unwrap, my hammerhead is relative again to everything else and is the proper size. So always double check when you're going through and you have that area setting on, or just whenever, double check and make sure that your scale is applied to your objects. Okay. The next idea is texture space. So in 3D, there is no limitation on space, but in 2D, our limitation is going to be these pixels. Our goal is to maximize the usage of our textures. I want as little empty space as possible. So in this example, everywhere that's blue is utilizing the texture. But everywhere in between, that's just wasted pixels. It's a waste of memory and everything. Right, so we want to pack these as much as possible. In a bit, I'm going to show you some add-ons where we can actually calculate the amount of space that we've used, but we try to aim, when we're doing props, somewhere around 85+% of the map should be covered by your UVs. Okay. One of the ways that we can optimize space is, just like I showed in the hammer, deleting faces that aren't going to be visible. So in this little payphone booth thing I made, on the back of the bar and on the back of the actual phone object part and on the bottom of the stand, if you're thinking about those in the game, they'll never be visible because this will be hammered against the wall and on the ground, right? So those blue areas are currently being wasted in our texture space. Poof, they're gone. We don't have to worry about them, so we can get rid of them. And we've just saved all of that texture space for other objects that do need it. Okay. In this case, I didn't crash it against the wall. I just had another part that was in the back of it, and it also still covers the same thing, so we don't need them. Okay. The other bits to making sure things are optimized is that artistic element of, do I have enough seams versus do I have enough texture usage? And to check this, we use materials and checker materials. So every object has room for a material slot. If we export these and put them into Game Engine or anything else like that, you'll see little options pop up for materials. So in Blender, we're going to navigate to that little material icon, which looks like a paintball here. It's in our properties panel, so that's the one on the bottom right by default. And if I click, by default there's nothing there, but we can go ahead and click New. And now I've created material.001. Okay. Every material has some properties contained within it. So in this case, this material and every material in every program is built upon what's known as a shader. And different shaders have different elements that are available to them. This shader is called a BDSF shader. BSDF shader, sorry. I don't know what that stands for, and honestly, I don't care, because that is the Blender shader. Okay? This shader does not go outside of Blender. If I export, I can't expect this shader to go with my object. Unity will have their own, namely the URP shaders and the HDRP shaders for materials. Okay? So we're not going to worry too much about this material. We just need to create a visualization for our UVs. So the only one I want you to worry about in Blender is base color, because that'll help us get a good look at what's going on. Okay, so if I click that little yellow dot under base color in my material option, so if you're following along, you've probably made a material, click that yellow dot, you're going to see image texture as one of your options. Okay, again, all of these other ones that aren't image texture are Blender specific shaders. Don't worry about those, they won't export to your game by default. There are ways to make it happen, but not ways that we're going to go over because we have better ways of doing it in Substance Painter. So for now, just go to image texture, because one thing that is transferable between any engine is image textures. You can always upload them to shaders. That's the default. That's how it's been for years. From there, we can go back to our UV editor. So if you've made a material, you've clicked the yellow dot, you've clicked image texture, and then over here you've kind of got new and open. At this point you could theoretically add any image you want. I don't know what this screenshot is. I'm just going to open it and hope it's nothing egregious. It's a blueprint for a jack stand that I was modeling for Modeling 2. Okay, but you can see it's showing up on my model. What I'd recommend you actually do is click New, okay, and this little menu is going to pop up. Underneath Generated Type, we're going to click blank, and it'll pop up a couple options. We're going to hit UV grid or color grid. Either one works. And hit new image. Okay. So now I've got a grid that I can use on my object to visualize. And if you can't see it, what you need to do is hit Z and then just pop down to Material Preview. Okay. So this is the same thing, but just in the slides here. Once we've made our material, it'll show up and we can click on it. Here it's just called Untitled. So if I call this grid test, right, we can hit Z and then 2 to go into Material Preview. And further, let's go back to that jack stand example. On my UV side at the top, this is super important. You're going to have to do this. On my UV side, I'm going to hit this little drop down and click whatever texture I'm looking at right now. So in this case, the jack stand. Now in edit mode, I can see how my UVs are mapping to my texture. I can see exactly where these things are coming from. Ignoring the jack stand, if we use the grid test, you can see exactly what's going on. So grid test on both. Okay, we can see where UV is getting affected. What part are you lost with? So we're making a new material, or making a new texture in Blender. It's built in. So if you just click up here, there's a button that says New. And by default, it's blank, and it'll just be a black canvas. But if you click on the blank option and click UV grid, and then click New Image, it'll just create a new UV grid that looks like this. Okay. And once you have that UV grid in your actual material, by default, it'll look like this. We can click the yellow dot and find image texture. And then if we press specifically this little image drop down, any of the images in our file will pop up. So in this case, the grid. So just untitled.
That's not good.
What's that?
Blender's Blender froze.
Oh, I can't help you with that, unfortunately. That's how Blender is.
Okay, so after you apply a texture to it, is there still a way to change it? Is there any plus button?
This little drop down here,
Well, how do you make a new one?
a new texture. You can make it on this side as well. So if I clear this, the new button pops up again. So if I hit new now, I just make it, oops. If I make a new one that's just pure black, it's called Untitled 002. And then if I drop down, I can find Untitled 002 and apply it. I'm showing you this as a sort of baseline so you get an understanding of what's going on. In a moment, I'm going to show you an add-on that does this in one click. But this is so you understand what's actually happening. Okay. But this way, if you have a texture that already exists, we can quickly map our object to the existing texture. So I've just got this object, left, front, right, bottom, top, back. And I can quickly tell where my face is supposed to be on my UVs to match up with my texture. Get real familiar with this cube because he's part of your weekly assignment.
Okay, alright, then Blender stop freezing. What do now?
That part, we could probably skip that part and I'll just show you with the extension.
Alright.
It's going to do everything we just did. I was just showing you how to do it vanilla. The extension will handle the rest. So this part's also pretty important. Blender UV manipulation sucks by default. It's bad, but we have a lot of tools that can help. The issue is, I gotta take you through the installation process real quick. So up here under Edit Preferences, same way we've installed any other extensions, and I double checked, they're both available in the Extensions tab. So go ahead and navigate to the top left, where you'll find Edit Preferences. Okay, so once I hit Edit Preferences here, it's going to bring up this little window. I'm going to go to Get Extensions. Okay, and the first one I'm going to have you install is called UV Toolkit. You kind of need this one. It's like essential. It's very hard to work in Blender without it. So UV Toolkit, no spaces. UV Toolkit. Okay, I already have it installed, so I can't install it again. But there will be a little install button you can press. Yep.
What does this extension do?
I will explain. For now, just go ahead and add it, and then we'll get to it in a second.
Wait, earlier when you showed us, like, you can manipulate the UV map, why would we ever manipulate, like, vertices?
Great question. There's not a ton of real reasons. It's just more of a now you know kind of thing. We are going to manipulate them to make them straighter. So that handle, for example, that we had that was kind of straight, but at the top it was angly. We're actually going to increase those angles to make our UV more rectangular for reasons I'll also explain later. So once you have UV Toolkit installed, okay, it's going to add a lot of menus. So over here on our UV side, I'm going to hit N. So N stands for Info Panel. So this is the same for 3D and 2D, this Info Panel. And you'll see now, after installing the extension, there's an option, UV Toolkit. And there is a lot here, okay? There is a lot here. So once I have UV Toolkit installed, I'll show you how to do that same checker thing, but just 10 times easier. I'm going to click on this object and just delete the material we made so there's no material on it. And underneath Checker Map, so scroll down in UV Toolkit menu.
Why is it not letting me delete materials?
You have to press the little minus button. You can't hit delete.
Wait, what? How? Where?
The little minus button beside the plus button where you added the material in the first place. Yeah.
That's weird.
So now in the UV toolkit menu over here, if I scroll down, you'll find there is checker map. Convenient. So if you hit custom, there'll be options for custom ones, but it's a lot easier to hit built in because the Blender one is pretty nice. And you just type in the size of your texture. So in this case, I'm just going to do 1024 because that's easy. So 1024 by 1024. I can choose either the checker grid for UVs or the color grid. And I can hit create checker material. Boop.
Whoa.
Okay. Way simpler. Let's do this to the next object. Just going to click, boop, click, boop. And now I've done the entire object really, really quickly.
I don't know if it's something to do with my like render setting, but mine's a lot darker than yours.
You're probably in solid mode.
How do I get out of
Press Z, and then material preview mode is the better mode for viewing the UVs.
Oh, everything's gone now.
It takes a second to render.
Okay.
Marcus.
Yep.
Oh, it's
You
thank
press
you.
create checker material, right?
Yes.
Okay, I got a gray material.
Are you in solid view mode?
No, I'm material preview.
Did you add the size of the material, 1024 by 1024? A 0 by 0 texture will be, yeah, not the right color. Okay, so now we can kind of see that our checkers are all good. So let's say that we're happy with how our checker material looks. Now normally I would have to go boop and then start deleting them, but again, we have a button instead now. Remove all checker materials. One button, boom. So once I know that my UVs are good with my, I don't know how it just switched. My Blender just crashed, fun. I did not save that file, but it's chill. There's a button called remove checker materials. So after you add a checker material here, yep, another one will pop up where you can remove it. The other ones I want to demonstrate, more or less, is just going to boil. There's a ton, obviously, for you to get used to. The other one we'll take a look at in a bit is straighten UVs. So I will reopen Blender. Did it autosave? Are we good? No. Okay, give me like 12 seconds. Okay. All right, I'll save this time so it won't crash again. Anyway, so underneath we can remove checker materials. The other one that is really big in UV Toolkit that's super useful is if I take a look at my UVs. And this is more of an optimization than anything I would probably show next year, but I can just show you now since we're kind of going over it. Wrong one. Not that one. All right, rather than just rebuilding this example, because it's the same example, I'll just show you from here. You'll notice something about our UV space. It is square. Can anyone tell me the best way to fill up a square space?
With squares?
With squares. So all of these are different islands, technically. I've cut all these up. These are all different and disconnected. What we end up with on our UV map is 99.4% usage of our UV map. That's incredible. And that 0.006% is just for margins so we don't bleed into ourselves on our texture. Okay, now what if I do the exact same thing with circles? We've gone from 99% to 80%. Okay? So simply put, we want to make sure that our UV islands are not only flat and our area relative, but typically we want them to be as rectangular as possible too, because that means less anti-aliasing, or less aliasing, sorry, and it means we get better space usage. So a lot of those middle parts that we make, like the hammer, for example, come out a little bit curved. So if I look at this piece right here, it's come out a little bit curved. That's going to be this piece underneath. This one right here. Right? Curved. And because it's a little bit curved, there's going to be a little bit of area stretching. What we can do with UV Toolkit is select this island, and if I hit straighten UVs, it's going to remove the curve. So my island that was just curved and aliasing, if I hit straighten UVs here under Unwrap on the UV Toolkit panel, it's now straight, rectangular, right?
Where'd you hit straighten UV?
It's in the UV Toolkit menu. So if you hit N to pull up the info panel, under UV Toolkit, the add-on we just installed,
Yep.
it's under Unwrap.
Okay. This menu is big. There's a lot of stuff.
There is a lot, yeah. But the only ones you really need to worry about for now are straighten UVs and the checker material stuff. So now I have this straight UV here. This straight UV is much better for packing, right? We're putting a rectangle inside of a box, much better than that weird curvy shape we had before, right? So anytime we have those slightly curvy shapes, we can just straighten them out. Now, we do get a little bit more angle stretching as a result of doing this. But the extra space usage is usually worth the trade-off, especially for something like this where those faces are hardly visible. Okay, so this would be where I would kind of stop. Okay. So that's everything. Oh, yep.
Sorry, mine's telling me I need to disable UV sync.
UV sync is that little button in the top here. You can also disable and enable UV sync from the top here.
What is UV sync?
So by default, UVs only show up when you have them selected. So if I have it selected over there, my UVs show up. If I enable UV sync, the selections are synced up. So if I select this face, it selects it over here, and vice versa. So if I select over here, it selects it up here. So it's very good for debugging, but some things require you to have it turned off. Okay, if everybody's good with UV Toolkit, we're going to move on to the second extension. Yay. Second extension is a lot simpler. It does some of the same things, some different things, but it just mostly calculates the amount of UV space we used, which is important. So I'm going to head right back to that menu. Edit, Preferences, Get Extensions. And this time, instead of UV Toolkit, we're going to type in Texel space density checker. And there it is. And I don't even have it installed on here, so it's perfect. I can install it with you. So I'm going to go ahead and click Install. Okay, boom. Once it's installed, just like UV Toolkit, it's going to pop up straight into our info panel. So if I pop in here, underneath UV Toolkit is now Texel density. Okay. So if I select my old object again, we can come in here. We can calculate textile density. And it will tell us how we're making use of our space. Calculate TD, yep. And I will say it looks like it's bugging out a bit because it's telling me I'm using 3%, which is definitely not right, but here we go.
Okay, 68%.
Yep, there you go. 67%.
Yeah, 68%.
I had to unrectify my thing here. If I rectify it again, it'll be higher.
Yeah, mine's not like a half. It's a forward. My thing over there. I don't know what's up with that one.
Yeah, it's all relatively in the same realm. Okay. So 67% is not very good. Not very good at all. But we don't really have anything else to add to this object, right? This is the end of our object. There are a few little things we can do. So if we wanted to use more of our space, we can pick the islands that are the most important, and we can scale them up just a bit. We don't want the textile density to get crazy out of hand where our squares are different sizes, but if we take, let's say, our hammer faces and just make them a little bit bigger, just to give them a few more pixels, it won't be the end of the world. So now that they're a little bit bigger, I'm going to use A to select everything on that side. Okay, so A is select all. I'm going to go to the top here, and you'll see there's a menu for UV at the very top. When I press UV, it'll give me a bunch of different options for my UVs, but the one that we're looking for right now is Pack Islands. So Pack Islands is going to take all of my islands. It will not re-unwrap them. Why is this important? Well, if I re-unwrap this, the ones I just scaled up are going to scale back down to the size they were when I unwrapped it. And the one that I rectified over there and made into a straight line from a curve, it's also going to recurve because that's how it was when it was unwrapped. But if we use Pack and click, it'll try and keep everything the same size we had it, the same exact dimensions we had it, and plop it on to try and fill up as much space as possible. So let's check now. 76, right? Using textile density checker, I'm just checking the UV space. So I hit calculate, 76 now, right? Still not great, but much better than 67 or whatever. And we can continue to do more with this and sort of scale things up and around, making sure our area doesn't get too out of hand, but making more use of our texture space. And again, this is a balancing act of what is too much scaling compared to how much texture space is okay to get away with. Because this object is so simple, it is going to be really hard to fill this texture space. I would probably stop here and say, okay, this is good enough. If you try to push it any further, you're going to start making the different squares different sizes, right? Which we can further check by using our checker material maker. (1024 by 1024). Okay. Right, so these squares are technically a little bit smaller than the other ones because we made the islands bigger, but it's not visible enough to really cause problems, right? And we're using more of our space, so it's a win-win. Okay, much simpler menu. That's everything. You can also use it for textile density stuff, but that's something that we'll learn with environments. That's for later. All right, it is 7:07. So there's roughly 40, 50 minutes left here. I say 30 minutes, might have to speed it up a little bit. I'm not going to really go along with you on this. I just want to give you a chance to take a break or work on your activity if you want. So activity number 4, a little bit different this time. Last week we did the whole like examples in the file thing. This time I'm going to do that again, but for grades. So if we hop into home, under week number 4, There's activity challenges week 4.blend.
Do they actually give you?
So if I go ahead and download this, yeah, this is the weekly activity. So if I download activity challenges week 4, they're very simple. I say 30 minutes. It will not take 30 minutes, and Josiah is going to go over the answers with you probably in the lab. So if you're confused, you can still get your grades and 100% by going to the lab and participating. So once I've got that downloaded, I can open it up. And this time I did not write with my mouse, so you can actually read the questions. Was it readable? I figured this is probably easier. So, right, there are 6 problems, quote unquote. Each one really should only take like a few minutes to solve at longest. And then the very last one here is another one that Josiah will go through with you. But it's basically just make a simple model like you have been, but also UV unwrap it. And I don't even care if it's something you've already made. And you're just going to go ahead and unwrap it now. You just have to demonstrate it with the texture, the checker texture that I just showed you how to turn on. And Josiah will show you again in the lab how to turn that checker texture on. That way we can submit with screenshots still. So I'll give you some time to work on it now. I'll just quickly go over this first one, right? So if I go into UV mode, you can see I've got all the different faces of this cube separated, right? I showed you how to go up to the top here, find an image texture, and underlay it under UVs. And now we can manipulate our UVs to put these faces in the right spots, right? So I just put this here on top. Boop. So for the first one, you're just labeling the cube. Pretty simple. For the second one, I've got 2 cubes of identical size, but when I unwrap them, the UV islands are different. Unwrap them together specifically, right? What could possibly be causing this? You probably know the answer just sitting there looking. Like I said, this won't take too long. Your goal is just to fix it and make the squares all the same size. Okay. For the next one, I've got this little dumbbell shape, and it doesn't currently have any UV seams. Your goal, quite simply, is going to be to unwrap it as if it was 3 different cylinders to make those flat UVs, just like we kind of went over in class. For the fourth one, I've got a lot of wasted UV space. There's a lot of parts of the mesh that just aren't visible. That's something we should probably clean up, and then you can re-unwrap it and get everything sorted out and nice. And for the last one here, all of the squares should be the same size. So you can use the textile density checker add-on or the other one to make sure all the islands are properly scaled, or however you'd like to do it. Okay. And then 6th is take either an existing model that you've made and UV it, or make a new model and UV it there. Okay. And then just share the screenshot of the checker material of the model, just like I showed you how to do, as well as the UVs themselves. So I'll show you the quick example submission. Right. So I went through and did these, so you can actually look at this and see what yours should look like. If you're curious, it'll end up looking like that, and then just imagine your model there. I didn't make one. And then at the bottom, just add a second screenshot. That's the UVs of your object. Is that good for everyone? Cool. So it shouldn't take too long. It's not, again, like I'm really not trying to hammer you with these weekly activities. This should take like 20 minutes tops kind of thing. People have already submitted, so there you go. It's not too bad. I wasn't expecting anybody to already submit. Okay. Yes.
Just a question about the UV unwrapping. I was like, oh, maybe just like a scaling thing. But I applied the scaling and I unwrapped both together, and they didn't work.
Double check.
I did. Like I literally went in object So like both open, you unwrap the face, and
You hit A first to make sure it's all selected.
can I show you?
Sure, quickly. So we'll also take this as like a quick break, quote unquote. In like 10 minutes, I'll come back and I'll show you guys Substance Painter. So we're not going to be doing any texturing today, probably, but I want to get you guys familiar with starting up files so you can explore this stuff on your own over the next week and maybe come ready to start texturing as soon as class hits next week. So we'll do that in like 10 minutes. I'll pause the recording here and come back to it. All right, gonna resume real quick. So that probably would have been enough time to complete it if you were locked in and finishing up there. The last thing I want to show you today is unrelated to the weekly. That's why I pushed it till afterwards. This is not crucial. This is just to give you a head start in case you want to learn about texturing before next week. So I'm not going to show you how to make textures right now. We're just going to talk about the program that we're going to use to do it. So once we have an object that's modeled and it's UV'd and it's ready to be textured, so in this case, I'll just use the hammer that we made because we have it, so might as well. We know that this is ready to go. What we need to do is export this in a format that works for all of our other places that this model is going. That includes Substance Painter, that includes Unreal, Unity, wherever. So we need to learn about exporting. And I touched on this very briefly at the end of last class, the different types of exports we're going to do. For this one today, we're going to be using FBX. So I'm going to select my objects, all the different parts at once. And I'm going to go up to File and Export. Oh, sorry, one thing I need to do, I need to make sure I've gotten rid of my checker material. Okay? Otherwise, when you export this, it'll maintain that material slot for the checker. So I'm going to get rid of the checker material. Perfect. So with my object selected, I'm going to go to File in the top left, Export, and click FBX. Okay, same thing as in the slides. And then I'm going to use operator presets. So I'm just going to make sure to select selected objects. In this case, I just want the mesh. Under geometry, where it says normals only, I'm going to turn that to face. Okay, and I can uncheck animation. I don't need any animation. So these exact settings are what I have screenshotted in the slides, so you can take a look at it here. And it's called simplehammer.fbx. I'm just going to export that to my desktop. Okay. So now on my desktop, I have simplehammer.fbx. Like we talked about last week, FBX files are binary, they're fast, they're easy to use, but they're hard to understand. So we can't open it and look at it, we just need to assume it's right and open up Substance Painter. Okay, so this is what Substance Painter looks like. Well, at least this is what it looks like for me. I don't exactly know what the default layout is now. It's changed a lot. You guys are using 2025, I'm using like 2020, I think, is when I bought this. So mine is a little bit out of date and things are going to be in slightly different places, but I'll do my best to ask you where it might be on your version and tell everybody else. But what we need to worry about right now is going up to the top and clicking File and then New. So this is how we can open a new project. And at the very top here, the first thing, template. Earlier we talked about shaders and the ones that apply to different engines and how you need a different set of textures for different shaders. The default shader that we should be using for our projects majority of the time is one called PBR, stands for Physically Based Rendering, Metallic Roughness Alpha Blend. This will give us options for our metallic map, which we need in Unity and Unreal, roughness, which we need in Unity and Unreal, and alpha blending, which allows us to have opacity, which is something you also are probably going to want at some point. So by default, this is the one I'm going to recommend using. If you know you don't need opacity, you can use PBR, metallic roughness, no alpha blending, just metallic roughness, okay? I'm going to be using alpha blending. So find this somewhere, PBR, metallic roughness, alpha blend. I don't know if it's updated. In my case, it's most definitely not. Like my options are for Unity 3 and Unreal 4 because this version is very old. Maybe in the new 2025 you have templates that will directly export to Unity and Unreal. You can take a look and check. I'm not sure.
UHD and even Roblox if you want.
Even Roblox, okay.
Those are cheap.
Interesting. I'd recommend still using the default PBR one just to get familiar with the different maps because those other exports will combine them. So once we have that selected, it's going to ask for a file. And what it wants here is your 3D file, either in FBX or OBJ. So when I select file, it's going to open up my browser. I'm going to go to my desktop, and I'm going to pick simplehammer.fbx. Next is document resolution. This is just the size of our textures that we're going to make. In this case, 1024 is more than enough. 512 is probably fine too. Next one. Kind of bombing through these, but a lot of these things you won't know yet because you don't know what your games are going to look like. If you're using Unity, okay, Unity is built on OpenGL, so you're going to want to switch to OpenGL. If you're using Unreal Engine, they're built on DirectX, so you're going to want to switch to DirectX. You kind of need to know which program is going to do what. Okay? This is for our normal maps that we'll export later. So in my case, I'm going to imagine I'm working for Unreal, which is usually what I am doing, DirectX. Okay, that's it. Click OK. Our model is imported, and we have a very similar setup to Blender. I've got my UVs on one side, and my model on the other. Okay. You can check the slides if you're unsure, because I've got it all here as well. Caveat. Blender does not use what we call industry standard navigation when it comes to 3D. So all of your hotkeys that you just kind of memorized, like pan, middle mouse, and control pan, middle mouse, not how navigation works in other programs, whether it's Marmoset or Blender or Unreal or whatever. These are your new controls. Orbiting is using Alt-click. Panning is using Control-Alt-click. Mouse wheel is zoom. That's the same as in Blender.
Is there a way to change it?
Is there a way to change it? Probably, but I would honestly just suggest getting used to these because other programs use these as well. Blender is the odd one out, not Substance. So, Ethan, yes.
I was going to say, you can also just do Alt and middle mouse click, and then you'll be able to.
Fair enough. I didn't know that. I used click, but yeah. Control click, Alt middle mouse, Alt click for orbiting. Yes, it is different. Yes, it will take some getting used to. This slide actually took me so long to realize I even had to make because after how long you've spent in each program, I forgot that they were even different. I just intuitively used the right ones, and eventually you guys will too. Because you're going to be jumping between these two programs so frequently for the rest of the semester. Okay, take some time now. This is why I'm kind of giving this intro because you got to get used to these new things. We also have a few different settings, but again, we're kind of building on what we know from Blender. We've got our layers, very similar to Photoshop layers. Very similar, they have blending modes, they have masks, they have all the things that you have in Photoshop, they have here but on steroids. Next, properties. Just like in Blender, your layers are gonna have properties. That's how they work. You know, this layer might be filled red. That fill will show up as a property, okay? Your last two hotkeys I'm going to teach you for right now. One is brush, and two is eraser. Okay. So if I jump over here, I'm Alt-clicking to pan and Control-clicking to move. Okay. And you can see I've got a cursor just like in Photoshop. And if I press and click, I can draw on my model. Okay. And I can draw on either side. I can draw on the UV side as well. So if I draw over here, it's also drawing on the model. Okay. That's all I really wanted to show you, because you can get just familiar with these over the next little while. Maybe if you have all these skills when you come to the texturing class, it's going to make a lot more sense. Okay. Just get used to the navigation, get used to using the brush and the eraser. Okay. And everything else we'll kind of explore more in depth next week. The last thing you might want to play around with if you're just messing around is down here we have what are called smart materials. You can see if I drag a smart material onto my object, it will texture that object. So now I've got this metal texture applied to my object that I can build off of. Okay. There's a bunch more you can do. We can add like paint layers on top of this and start painting in different colors on top of the metalness and whatever else. We have a bunch of different properties we're going to be using in our brushes. We can control things like color, roughness, metallicness, all these different PBR settings that we're going to learn about next week. But for now, just try and get used to navigating in the space. Try to move around your model and paint different things on it in different places. And see how it affects your UVs and your texture map as well over here. Okay. With that, that is everything I have for you. Is everybody got Painter installed and is sort of like messed around with it just a little bit right now? Yeah? Okay, cool. If you have messed around with it right now, you're going to be leagues and bounds more ready for next week when we start actually texturing things, right? It's going to be the exact same thing, just in different layers. For example, I've got this basic metal. Maybe we can add some rust on top and make this rusty kind of hammer. All right, I'm not going to explain what I'm doing. I'll just show you an example of what this program can do, and then we'll explain kind of next week, right? So now I can add some rust in different places. Right? Wow. Rusty hammer. Looks awful, but you get the idea. We'll go through and we'll make everything look nice and pretty next week. Okay? That is it.